Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of NXTGEN Pastors, and I serve MNA as the Director of Ecosystems Development. Well, from what I'm reading these days, it seems as though we are living in great times. Last spring, we started hearing about the Great Resignation. While mostly applied to the service industry, there is an increasing number of people who, in the context of the pandemic, have walked from their jobs. Well, now I'm hearing about the Great Reset, in which work-life balance is being reset to what some say is really pre-industrialized times. Work and home are now one and the same for more and more people. And that, they say, has given way to the great reshuffle, wherein after decades of decline in entrepreneurship, there is a resurgence of new startups since the pandemic. People are in change. Well, that means indeed there is a whole lot of transition going on. And it's not just in business, but in ministry as well. A year ago, a Barna Group survey reported that 29% of pastors contemplated leaving ministry. Now, a year later, that figure, they say, has risen to 38%. Now, whether this actually happens or not, there is now, and frankly, has always been transition in ministry. The typical cycle of transitions in ministry, they say, happens at the first year or two of ministry, but then around years 8, 14, 21 are the common markers for change in where and how one serves the church. See, the truth is, I challenge you to name a pastor who at the end of his service has only ever served one church. People are amazed when I say that I planted and pastored the same church for 26 years, and yet, Lord willing, that may comprise only half of my service to the body of Christ. So whether pandemic-induced, trauma-related, desire for new ventures, or retirement, pastors do transition. See, the problem is not the transition itself. The problem can be we just don't talk about it very much, and that's why we're here today. So with us today is Vincent Tauriello. He is the MNA Coaching Specialist, here to talk about transitions. Ben, tell us a little bit more what we're going to be doing here today.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. And yeah, I love what you just said, Chris. And there is one constant, right, in life, and that is change. That's often said. And yeah, transitions in ministry are necessary. There's a time and a season for everything under the sun. And so transitions are just a part of that, a part of life. And yet they can be very hard, very challenging, very difficult. And they can be opportunities where there is hurt and harm through them and on the backside of that. And they can also be opportunities for personal growth, new possibilities, and even gratitude, appreciation for what was and what's ahead. And so today, yeah, as Chris mentioned, we want to present on the topic of navigating transitions in ministry. And yeah, let me just clarify that a little bit further. The first thing I would like to say is that transitions are a natural and necessary part of life and ministry. Everything has a beginning and an ending. And so that requires transition. Transitions are also hard. They're hard to accept if we don't want that to happen. They're hard to appreciate and embrace. They're also hard to navigate in a way that isn't unnecessarily stressful. You can't take away all the stress. And that it provides benefit, not just for one, but for as many as possible, for hopefully for all parties involved. And then the third thing I'd like to say is that transitions are opportunities, and because we do not operate in a vacuum, but there's a spiritual dimension going on, there are opportunities for good or ill, for bitterness or for blessing, for growth and good change, or for decline and further stuckness. And so it's the idea of seizing that opportunity for good.
Good. Well, as we talk about transitions, and there are all sorts of transitions in our life in the context of where we're serving and how and and the like. We have a poll here I'm going to launch, and I want you to say which one of these would you say is the most challenging. Now, a good number of you that have signed up, you may not be pastor, but serving in a church. Maybe then just kind of think, what do you imagine it would be for a pastor in this kind of a context? Because we're looking at the unique challenges of transition in ministry. So here's the poll. And so just take some time. Is it, the first one is ending one ministry to start a new one in a new place. So that would be the kind of typical. It's about 2/3 of pastoral transitions really fall into this one, where you leave one church, go to another. And then ending one ministry, take on a new role in the same place. That has its own unique challenges. And the third one, ending formal ministry for another line of work. So stepping away from formal ministry in that context to do something completely different. And then when it comes to retiring, they each have their own challenges for us. And as you're taking some time answering those, love to see what you think, what you imagine is the most challenging there.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where people land on this one, Chris.
Yeah, yes. So we have about 2/3 of you have answered. Yeah, keep answering it. We'll leave it up there, but I think we're beginning to see a trend here. From our attendees, 40% are saying ending formal ministry for another line of work. So it's leaving the church, going into another work. Why do you think that? Why do you think that would be considered such a challenge, or what's unique about that challenge?
Which one then?
Yeah, on the third one. Wait, can you see this? I always forget. Maybe you can't see it.
I can
Okay.
see it.
Yeah.
So ending formal ministry for another line of work?
Yeah, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. There you go. So I'm going to assume all of the attendees can see this now. Yeah, the third one came up to 42%.
Yeah, there's a tie with the first two.
Yeah.
And then the 42% for the third, ending formal ministry for another line of work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense to me for one reason, and that is that it can be perceived as you're doing something wrong. Like ministry is this thing. It's kind of a hallowed profession. Mm-hmm. And how could you, are you turning your back on God, or do you not care anymore for the church, or something like that? People can get confused that calling, you only have one marriage in life, and that's with your spouse. If you're married, you don't marry a church, and you don't marry ministry.
I've heard someone say, and I would say misusing Paul in Romans, the gifts and calling are irrevocable. So, that very thing, it is a breaking, almost blasphemous to turn away. And the weight of that has got to be huge. I think some of it is, where is our identity found? As wonderful as a calling to serve the body of Christ as an officer in that body is indeed a high calling. To make that your identity, problematic.
Yeah, well said. So I'm wondering what questions might be emerging for you folks in the audience, the people who are the 39 participants. Any questions emerging for you at this point?
Feel free to. Jeff asks here, 115%, maybe math isn't pastor's greatest strength. Well, that is a given. Math is definitely my greatest strength. But I'm not sure if this poll is adding up to a sum greater. It looks like it very well may. Let's blame Zoom on that one. No one should allow me to ever do anything with numbers.
Well, at least a little. We'll accept a little injection of humor.
Yes. It's interesting. I do find it interesting there, though, that the lowest one, not by a whole lot, is ending formal ministry to retire. Mm-hmm. Again, it can be tied into that sense of identity. If I'm not preaching every Sunday, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And as someone who's transitioned, moving from, especially if you are the person up front, to no longer being up front, that can be a challenge to one's ego. And
Yeah.
self, you have to be very
Yeah.
careful there.
What are your thoughts, Chris, on that third one being so high?
Yeah, I think it is a sense of identity. If I go from one ministry to another, or if I'm within the, shift within the church, what my role is, or still am in the church but do a different ministry, I'm still within that safe realm, so to speak. But when I choose to transition, usually, we always leave from and we leave to.
Yeah.
So why are you leaving from the ministry? Where are you going to? Well, you're leaving from probably there's some hurt. And I've yet to meet a pastor out there after years of service that hasn't gotten some wounds and hurt that goes on. And so there can be a lot of difficulty in that transition. What are you going to? Or do you feel you're moving to something that's healthier? Or are you doing it out of, I just got to make money and I ain't staying in the church?
Yeah.
So I think that is probably one of the bigger challenges.
Yeah. One question that came in, Chris, is should a transitioning pastor be required to leave the church he pastored?
That is the question that always is asked. I think it depends on the context. It really, to have a hard and fast rule, but I think you do need, the longer that first pastor has been there, the one that's transitioning out, the longer he's been there, his fingerprints all over everything, having that space is really going to be important. And what that looks like, I think it depends on the one leaving, his personality, the pastor coming in, that pastor's ability. Yeah, it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, I like that. And we got a little clarification that the poll allowed for multiple responses, so you might be off the hook with the whole math.
Well, good. Yeah. There's a question. You have two questions in the Q&A box. Can you give us some advice for someone looking to leave a failing work? It can be difficult because search committees tend to pronounce judgment by guilt by association, seeing the pastor as a failure too. Some bases can be covered, such as good explanation of desiring another call, but it is still hard. Whatever advice you can give on finding another call in general would be helpful. So yeah, in that kind of transition, I think it's a good question. One thing I would say is search committees really do need, pastors and search committees need to understand that pastors in transition, churches in transition are people and bodies in some degree of trauma or crisis. Even if it's a good transition, it's still a change. And that's why, we're going to be talking about it. I think that is one thing. And the other thing I would just encourage, let's rethink what success and failure is. And again, when we talk about pastoral transition, if we look at Paul's transitions, they sometimes were but weeks, not years. And he often left with a bad headache from rocks on being hit. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. Vincent, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that sounds challenging. To be a part of a failing work in and of itself is quite difficult, and sort of coming to terms with that, and and some, what are the lessons to be learned from that? And I think the more able you are to process that well, I think the better you can have, an answer to potential search committee's questions. So really making good use of the time to reflect and understand, why this is and where you want to be next. Yeah, I think that's the best you can do in that regard. We had another question here. What are some bad reasons to leave one ministry context for another? And what are some good ones?
Oh my. Good ones are easy. At least if we think they're good, it doesn't mean they're always right. But the bad reasons, how would you identify those?
Bad reasons?
Yeah.
Oh. Maybe one would be, not being willing to engage the hard conversations that need to happen, whether there's a shift in philosophy of ministry or clash in that, or there's some, pastoral issues that are just wearing down on the focus of the pastor or the session or whatever. I think not being willing to deal with those things doesn't mean they'll all get resolved, because,
Right.
you can only do your part in that, and you can't make it happen.
Yeah, I think as pastors, we are not well wired for conflict. And those that are, we know them, and we usually run away from them if they run towards conflict. But by and large, we're people pleasers. And so it is hard for us to have crucial conversations. So when we've tried and it just hasn't gone well, sometimes we run thinking this church is a bad church, and I can find something better. And it's just like, again, when you look at the churches in the first century and for the last 20, 21 centuries, there are issues out there, and we as the pastors are part of those issues. Have to recognize that.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, but good ones. What's available out there. I think there are a lot of just great opportunities, and I think to your point earlier, we're not married to the church. There is we really do have fairly good longevity as pastors in our churches, but we're recognizing that there's a cycle, and we are not the answer to this church for the next 50 years. Most likely. Yeah, it happens, but it's so rare.
Yeah, and I think a good reason is definitely gift mix. If you're a starter, if you're a planter or a starter of things, you're probably not going to be the best person for the middle section and middle of that church. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's we have a couple of other questions that came in, Chris. One is, does MNA try to assist with the transition from the church planting pastor to the next pastor, especially if the work has not particularized?
Yeah, I think no. Well, MNA as a General Assembly committee, committee. No, I would say in hope that MNA committees in presbyteries should very much be a part of that. If the church is operating with a provisional session or there's a mother church, I would hope that would be very much part of that process. And again, helping planters to recognize, we have an assessment, and that's just like, go for it. Nothing's perfect, and not all the events line up just perfectly. So there are times in which we need to help that planter go, you did a great job, or here's some places that, maybe could have gone better, you or the culture, the church, whatever it might be. Understanding where we look at character, the issues of competence, but also how do they fit together, compatibility, and sometimes that isn't there. And so to be able to go, hey, God's calling you to something else, and I think that's always important to recognize.
That's good. We have another question here. How do you advise, this is from Matt, having helpful conversations as you're considering leaving a current ministry context for another calling? Yeah, I think honesty is a big one. Yeah. Having honest and open communication is critical. Just putting your cards on the table, being straightforward, and keeping the lines open, the lines of communication open throughout the whole process. Beginning, middle, and end, and if necessary, on the other side. You know.
And that's where I think Chris Polsky's work on From Founders to Successor, we did this in the fall, and he's getting some of his stuff out there, is really helpful. Just having not a re-sign up each year with your session, that's not wise, but always having that conversation annually, and so that when it comes time to have that conversation, it's not out of the blue where they think, oh, I thought you were going to be here for 40 years. Yeah, that's an important part of that.
Yeah. Lisa asks, how would you recommend a church help make the transition easier for a new pastor and his family? It's a very thoughtful question.
Yeah. I think that's
I think one thing is to ask, how can we assist? What's needed? If they're new to the area, there's all kinds of just getting oriented, oh, here's where the supermarket is, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just to ask, to show a concern and an interest is really big,
And I think being aware of the shadow of the previous pastor, especially in cases where there's a longevity or it's the founding pastor, having those conversations out loud. Everyone might think, oh, we've moved on. No, you haven't. And so often the unrecognized or unstated situations that can make it difficult for the new pastor in that transition.
Yeah, that's good.
Dave Culp asked, there are some key areas that soldiers can struggle when transitioning out of service. Are there any key areas to be watching for when transitioning out of ministry?
I think something you said earlier, Chris, about identity. I think that's a key area, that you are not what you do. And so I think that it always kind of is wrapped up in that. Mm-hmm. I think that's important. And I think another is more practical, is like, do you have something to go to that will continue to use your talents and your passions and provide for your family? Mm-hmm. Those are just practical things that shouldn't go to nothing. You should go to something.
Yeah. One of the things we must never forget, when we talk about a pastor transitioning, we're talking about multiple levels of transitioning going on, not just for the pastor, but the pastor's wife. When a pastor transitions out of ministry and he's got a new call, and it's not a bad leaving, but he's going to a new place, his wife's going to an unknown. She's not going into that call. She's leaving a community, and if it was been a healthy situation, she's losing an awful lot. Yeah. The children that are involved, and again, you're going into a place that's in transition. Everyone is to a certain degree a crisis space. Mm-hmm. I think just keeping in mind there's no simple ABC process going on there.
That's really good, Chris.
So to that next question, what are some of the key principles, actions to follow when going through pastoral transitions? I think that's some of it. There are transitions, plural. Mm-hmm. It can be very, very difficult. And again, that's where I appreciated some of the work that Chris Polsky has done, where he talks about having a pastoral search committee and also a transition committee, and they're separate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that other committee helps the lead pastor leave well and bring in the new one well, and they're not in that search mode. Yeah, keeping them separate. Some great help there.
I know one book, I'll just hold that up, that has proven helpful to some, is one called Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud. That he lays out some principles and things.
Good.
Yeah.
Those are great questions. Appreciate that, because it's great to see the interest. And again, I think for good reasons. We're in a context of change.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, both you and I, Chris, have experienced transitions in ministry, and we've also had the opportunity to help others through them. Mm-hmm. And as you and I were discussing this subject together, we thought, it might be most helpful for all of us to just learn from the experience of some others. So we invited two guests to share with us some of their experience relating to transitions in ministry. And so we're going to invite them on. We have with us today Y. Plummer and Francisco Victa. And welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Greetings, guys. So as you guys have been listening in, any thoughts on your end from your experience? Or maybe better, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience before you start wowing us with your wisdom. Forgot that part. Yeah, help us talk to us a little bit about who you are, your background, and any transitions that have been part of your life.
You may want to call on us. My name is Y. Plummer, and I'm the African American Ministries Coordinator with Mission in North America. And I've had a number of transitions. And I have had 4 transitions from secular employment as an electrical engineer for about 20 years before I was called into ministry, and for another 10 years, from a seminary student to intern to co-pastor at a church in inner city Baltimore, until I became the coordinator in 2000. So I've been the coordinator since 2000. So I guess that's going to be 22 years that I'm going to be coordinator. And I'm presently thinking about and planning on and working on a transition into something else, which I don't want to call retirement. And that's the struggle with identity and what I've been doing for the past 22 years, transitioning out of that into, I'm not sure yet.
Thank you, Y. Thanks for sharing that. Cisco?
Yes. Hi, my name is Cisco Victor. I'm a church planter here in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. And it's been several years of transition. I was a pastor in a charismatic denomination prior to coming into the PCA and having a massive change theologically. And so that lasted for several years. That transition was a long duration. And then I became a chaplain in the midst of that change. And so I was a chaplain in the hospital context for 3 years, and then transitioned into as an assistant pastor in the PCA, and then ultimately now over the past year working as a church planner. So the transitions have been frequent and sometimes feeling quite violent and and sudden, as well as long in duration. So this is a topic certainly something I've walked out.
What would you say made the transitions that you each made, and you could identify just one of them or some of them, what would you say that made those transitions both necessary and at the same time difficult?
Well, I'll begin. The transition from chaplaincy back into pastoral ministry in the church was necessary. It was a goal of mine to be ordained in the PCA, and chaplaincy was this, in some ways, a liminal space that I would say bought me time, and yet as I became a chaplain, I would have been content to stay there because I learned so much, and yet I was a churchman at heart, so I was eager to be back into ministry in the church. So that's what made it necessary, but it was difficult because even though it was pastoral ministry, it was 2 radically different contexts between hospital work and back into the church.
Thank you.
I think my transitions have been relatively easy. I was ready to leave engineering when I left IBM in 1990 to pursue seminary. And then the transition into pastoral ministry was relatively easy also. I look forward to it. And I kind of had a very optimistic attitude about people and ministry. And I was a relatively new convert, so maybe that was part of the naivety of seeing the kind of the positive side of pastoral ministry. I had a rude awakening as I moved into pastoral ministry, discovered that I struggled with groups of people, didn't realize how much of an introvert I was. So transitioning into coordinator was relatively easy because I was able to work alone. I think the most difficult transition is right now, transitioning out of coordinator into thinking about retirement and where to go from there.
It sounds like some of what you're describing there then, especially in those early stages, is part of the transition is you're knowing yourself, how
Yes.
God made you. And because we have this mental image of what it would be, and then we have to go through a transition of saying, I have to destroy my image for the reality, rather than trying to destroy the reality to keep the image I so long for.
Mm.
Yeah, that's good.
Wow, that's good.
So in that process, how did you find growth and such, or pitfalls that kind of led to temptations or brought about some unwelcome consequences in the transition? So
I think I'm doing my best growth now. I think God is growing me now in just self-awareness, especially since I got a staff. I've been working as a Lone Ranger coordinator for about 18 years, and then I was given a staff more recently, and especially when COVID hit. Interestingly enough, my staff increased to 5 in 2020, March of 2020. And that is my biggest area of growth, is learning to manage a staff of people and dealing with personalities and loving people and drawing people out and understanding what my role is. That's been the most difficult thing I've done, learning to do that. And God is showing me myself. When He gave me the staff, I'm learning more about myself and my relationship with Him.
Yeah.
Now, why were you a church planter right out?
It depends on how you define church planter. I came into a pretty small setting, pretty small congregation in West Baltimore, and Steve Smallman and I co-pastored that work from its inception. Basically, it's kind of its beginning there, so it really wasn't a church plant technically.
Okay.
But it was a very small congregation that we helped grow.
The reason I'm asking that, and be interested for you, Cisco, you're on the front end of the plant. But the one thing I've noticed for church planters, it's a different kind of transition. It's a transition in the same context, the same church, especially when you move from planter to pastor. And it's not completely using the business terms, but entrepreneurial to managerial kind of. That's a transition, or a transition from no elders. You might have some sort of provisional session. Now you got to have elders. And then all of a sudden, those elders you trained, and then a couple of years later, you got a new batch of elders that are less part of those that you molded, perhaps. And those are transitions as well. And so that can affect the way we view what's going on in ministry.
Yeah, there is what you're talking about, Chris. I see this a lot with guys I work with. This moving from being a hero leader, which you're everything, you do everything, you make all the decisions, to more of a team leader, where you're equipping others and supporting others and seeing that everything gets done, but not doing everything, and not necessarily having the whole thing wrapped around you per se. So yeah, that's interesting that you brought that up, because I see that a lot.
Cisco, how about you in those transitions? Because you made transitions, they weren't a straight line transition. There was definitely some points of veering. How did those affect you and your family and others around you?
Yeah, I think the area of growth in the midst of the transition, particularly coming from one denomination, and then not being a pastor for several years, the area of growth for me was redefining success. Success for me was being behind the pulpit every Sunday, every Wednesday, and preaching. And then I find myself without a pulpit, in an entirely different context, not doing church work. Nevertheless, I found myself growing into a much more healthy individual. Our family became more healthy. And so that was the area of growth. The difficulty going from chaplaincy back into ministry and that transition is, in chaplaincy, you can go through hell in the hospital, seeing people go through hell and be a part of that. But when it's 5 o'clock, you're going home and nobody's calling you. Nobody's saying, hey, come back, or hey, what happened, because there's a chaplain that takes over. In pastoral ministry and now going into church planting, church work bleeds into the home, and people are still calling, and church work is still before you. So those have been some of the difficulties in transition that I've found challenging.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Both of you identified just growing in self-awareness as a key element of that transition, and just expanding your understanding and becoming, as you said, Cisco, a more healthy individual, having gone through that transition and have some distance there to kind of redefine success. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for sharing all that. So, guys, you are here, and there are people in front of you, and you've probably gained some key lessons that you both want to hold on to, but that you would, if someone was there asking you, what can you tell me? what can you give me to help me? What would some of those lessons be that were really important to you, that you want to hold on to, but that you think would be beneficial for you to share?
I think as a pastor out of seminary, I think it would have helped me quite a bit to have been mentored by someone. If someone could have taken me by the hand and showed me what pastoral ministry was all about and how to pastor people. I actually didn't know anything about pastoring at all, and needed to learn that, and so that was probably the greatest lesson there that I could have learned, and how to manage a staff. Now that I have a staff as a coordinator, it would have. One of the reasons why I decided to get a professional coach was to help me learn how to manage a staff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
The question here, be interested for you both kind of give your thoughts. Question is, any ideas on how to meaningfully begin to adapt our preaching and leadership to a new context? So I'm taking this, you've transitioned into a church. It's a different context from where you come, but they hired you. How do you help make that transition? Any suggestions you've seen that have been helpful or not helpful in that process? Because it's not a one size fits all. We don't just min out pastors and they can go in any place, any context, and transition is smooth. What should a guy transitioning into a new church do to make that transition as smooth as possible?
I think I had the benefit of living in the town where we're church planting for several years now. And so what I have learned over the past year is the importance of, those conversations in people's living rooms, at their kitchen tables, getting to know them. I have found that going to the pulpit with that knowledge of who these people are, they're different than the people that I was, just 30 minutes down the road as an assistant pastor, is a totally different context. And so it wasn't another world or even another state, but our county is different. So having those conversations with people and seeing that as cherished, valuable time, it's not just, of course, the importance of the Lord's Day and gathering for worship, but I can only meaningfully speak into these people's lives if I know who they are, what makes them tick, and what their concerns and troubles are.
I love that. Know your people, know those who are in front of you, and get to know them. If you're brand new, you had the benefit of being there, right? But if you're shifting contexts, just taking that time to get to know people and their context. Yeah. It's good.
I think myself, some of the things that can help, just be aware of, it all depends on how the church has handled the transition from previous pastor to you. Sometimes churches say, we loved our previous pastor, but here are 3 areas he did not excel. And we all have 3 or more areas we don't excel. And so they hire the guy that can excel in those areas. And it's a pendulum swing. And so you may find yourself part of that pendulum swing. So I think it does help to get to know, Cisco, as you said, the culture of the community, but the culture of the church. And you can't, nor should you, mimic the previous pastor, but be aware where he excelled and maybe didn't. And if you're picking up on his negatives, if you excel in his negatives, it probably means you're going to fail on his positives. So if you can at least be aware of those situations, because those are where the landmines are going to be found. His preaching style, you've got yours, and you shouldn't be trying to mimic his, but be aware of it. If you come in totally different, it's going to be like fingernails on a chalkboard, which is an analogy that most people won't understand anymore. Fingernails on a whiteboard doesn't quite communicate it anymore. It's going to be an annoying thing for them to listen to.
Yeah. Why, you mentioned a moment ago having a professional coach. What role and benefit would you say you gained from having a professional coach to help you navigate your most recent difficult or challenging transition?
A professional coach has helped me to help draw me out and help me to think and process, because I'm a verbal processor. So the coach helped me to delineate various plans in my transition, better able to coach even my present staff, and how to draw people out. Coach ask good questions. This is something that you generally have to pay for. Generally, your friends don't have the skill set to be able to draw you out. I usually start the coaching session with very little and discover that I have so much to say about what needs to be done. So I found a coach to be very helpful in helping me process my present transition.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, what has helped me in terms of having a coach is learning how to reflect. I found that I would just plow through, life, plow through ministry, plow ahead, desiring to be productive. And I was missing so many opportunities to step back and reflect on where I've been. And as Vinny has taught me this word, preflect, in terms of where I'm going. And so that has been it's been so beneficial in the midst of many transitions, is learning how to reflect upon ministry, life, my own thoughts and feelings.
I think another thing I'm thinking about right now is being able to ask questions as a way of loving people, just listening, asking good questions. And that's what a coach does. And I'm learning to do that. I generally don't do that. I listen, but not necessarily asking good questions to draw people out. Drawing people out, perhaps even without an agenda, just to draw them out, for them to be able to reflect on themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful secondary benefit to good coaching, is you experience it and you see how someone does it, and then you can replicate that in your own context. Great side benefit. I found in my transition, especially for me, transitioning from a pastoral, preaching context to beginning a new ministry, I hired a nonprofit coach, because having worked in the nonprofit my whole life, basically, I had no clue as to what starting is. This isn't starting a new church. This is starting something else. And that was invaluable. And that was great for a period of time. Then brought on another coach who was very helpful through the next phase. So it's a kind of an ongoing process, and is indeed helpful.
That's good.
Well, that's one of the things, we're doing here with these conversations, especially with Vincent as the coaching specialist. There is an opportunity. We always mention when we do these segments, these episodes with Vincent, just offering a 30-minute complimentary call to explore what coaching could look like. And so I'm going to post here two links that you'll be able to use if you're interested in exploring this anymore. Not sure I got the right one this time. There are two links. One is to his calendar, and the other you can get to him through the PCA MNA page on coaching services. So I encourage you to consider that, because again, when we're talking transitions, we're talking unknown territory.
Mm-hmm.
And we can only see what we see. Having that outside voice to kind of ask, like why you said, ask the questions you're not asking even yourself. And friends can be really helpful, but they sometimes have a different vested interest in in keeping a friendship and maybe not asking questions and such. It's a different context, but having that set opportunity to explore. Why are you doing this? This gets back, I think, to some of the questions we had early on. Don't you think, Vinny, that, good reasons to transition, bad reasons to transition.
Yeah.
Before you begin transition, having a coach could really help. Before you do something, and it's maybe not the correct theological terminology, before you do something stupid and flee from something you should really buckle down and work on, or I'm going to hang in there, I'm going to make this church work, and you harm yourself, the saints, your family.
Mm-hmm.
Can be really important.
Yeah, well said. And I thought it'd be helpful here towards the end of this time. I think it was asked a few times in the webinar for some tips. So I have a couple of tips. These are not the end all or be all. These are not a comprehensive list, just 4 tips for navigating transitions. And the first one I'm calling don't assume anything. Ask, discuss, clarify, keep communication as open as possible throughout the entire transition. So don't assume anything, keep the conversation going, put your cards on the table, preferably face up, and then keep those lines open. The second would be to process the transition with someone. It doesn't have to be a professional coach, but it should be someone outside of your context who can keep your confidence, who can ask good questions. We've heard that numerous times, how critical a good question can draw you out. Someone who can listen actively and be objective, make you feel safe. So processing the transition with someone be very, very important. The third so-called tip is to show grace. Show grace to others who are involved. Give the benefit of the doubt when possible. Think the best. Don't impugn motives. Bear with and forgive as needed all the way through. And also show grace to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Accept your frailty, your humanity. Deal and accept your own feelings and your own thoughts, and bring those to God. Bring those to that person that you're processing with. Don't try to be something you're not. Be where you are. So show grace. And then lastly, focus on what you can control. There's a lot of things in any situation that are completely out of our control, and we tend to kind of worry about those things and so on, and maybe stress over them. But so you can't control how people will react by your announcement that you're leaving or you're moving on. You can't control how people will respond, or how they will accept or resist the process. But you can control yourself and how you go through it. And you can also control your decisions, when, if, how, what, those kinds of things. And focusing there is really playing to the strength that you have. You have agency in this situation. You're not a victim. You're not on a runaway train. So I think those four things, can be of assistance as you want and seek to navigate the transitions that you're either facing or will face.
Great. Well, are there any other questions from our attendees or any other thoughts from our panel regarding transitions?
I think as I've thought about this topic and the word transitions, I keep going back to that term liminal space. We're not where we were, but we're not where we want to be. We're still on our way to where we're going. And that's a difficult space because we all want order, we all want belonging and stability. And yet what I have found is in those transitions, there's opportunity. There's opportunity to trust God. There's opportunity to hear what God is saying. There's opportunity to reflect and Lord willing, and hopefully to become a healthier minister.
No,
that's good.
I love that. We're not where we want to be. We're not where we were. We're somewhere in between. But it's a great opportunity to trust God and to grow ourselves. Yeah, great way to look at it.
Yeah.
One person responded, like in the wilderness. That's kind of what you're describing.
Absolutely.
Yes. We are a journeying people on a journey, and we forget that. We would like to be somewhere more stable and secure and defined.
Right. And I would gain a lot of encouragement thinking back to the Exodus story in the wilderness for Israel and Moses on the backside of the mountain, just how God was there. God was still working in that situation. We're certainly not Moses, but we can relate and also know that God is still with us in those very difficult times.
Mm-hmm. As long as those difficult times don't last more than a week,
That's right.
When they get a bit longer.
That's right.
Yeah. And for those who are attending, listening, watching, any takeaways that you have, maybe it doesn't have to be a question. It can be something that's has struck you, or maybe you've been thinking about this already and would like to share with the rest. Just feel free to type that in. Those things are always helpful to hear and see.
Any highlight, any takeaway, just feel free to put that in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I think as we were preparing this, mentioned it a little bit earlier, but that sense of transitions are always multifaceted. It's not one aspect. You're not just going from A to B. It's a spider web of changes going on, and we don't always take into account. It's hard. We can't hold all those things in our mind at any given time, but those are helpful.
So I see one comment is, I hadn't thought much about getting a coach for a transition, but it is a good idea. Great. Thanks for putting that in there, Jeff.
Yep. No, those things are helpful. Well, good. Well, great.
How about for our two guests? Any highlight or new awareness that's come as a result of this webinar for you?
Good.
I think for me, what was stated about, and I think why I may have stated this in regards to, whatever position we're in, even if it's non-clergy at the moment, and God may lead us into a place where we're not in that exact field that we define ourselves where we want to be, but to look at what God's doing in that moment as well, and what can we learn in that office that's different than what we're used to.
Mm. Yeah. Shiv writes, the 4 principles are helpful and the need to be in conversation with coaches and friends. Thanks, Shiv, for putting that in there. And then Lauren writes, I sure do like the idea of a transition committee and possibility of a professional coach. Thank you, Lauren.
Cisco, you mentioned reflect and preflect in the context of coaching. What does it look like to preflect in the process of transition?
Yeah, I think it's and I have to commend Vinny for this because he's helped me to look at, I'll use the example of chaplaincy, being a chaplain. Sometimes I have an all or nothing view, and so chaplaincy was chaplaincy, and now I'm in pastoral ministry, and 2 separate things. But he's helped me to reflect on what I learned in chaplaincy and what can be carried over now and into my ministry ahead. And so preflecting for me is drawing upon the reflections of where I've been and asking, how can I implement these lessons and what I've done before to where I am now and where I'm going.
So the absence of preflecting may cause you to constantly reflect on the same problems you've been having and you haven't learned anything. If I'm following you there, it's taking the lessons of past reflections into the present, looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's recognizing, God redeems. He redeems, right? He can redeem all things. And so even our failures in the past, how to move forward in light of those.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time and those who are able to join us. And we'll be following up again, as always, with a follow-up email with a link to this and some other information. Seek to include some of the things we've been referring to as we've talked here. Next week, we will be looking at rural church planting with Alan Foster. And the week after that, I'm hoping I get my order right, and it will be all in the information I send out, is going to be talking with Robert Kim at Covenant Seminary and the church planting track that they have going on there. And just not every week or every other week, we have another one of these. I'd love to have you join on these various church planting and renewal conversations. Until the next time, Lord bless. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Chris.